Can everybody see that in the back? That's about the best we could get in terms of color and maybe a better color scheme. Is that better? No. No? All right. I'll put it back. All right, so I'm Derick Bailey. Real quick before I get started, my company, I work for Derick. We build a product called Kendo UI. They are sponsoring me to be here tonight. I'm a developer advocate with Kendo UI. We build HTML5 JavaScript controls. If you haven't checked this out and you're looking for a good control suite, grids and charts and drop-down lists and tree views and all that kind of stuff, do check it out. We build some really cool stuff, and I'm quite proud of the things that we do at Kendo UI. So that's my spiel. I've got a couple of t-shirts up here, some stickers, some stress balls of our little guy, and some information, so you can grab one of those. The t-shirts run very small. This is an extra large, believe it or not, and it's pretty tight on me. So those are here. I've also got some other stickers from my Marionette project, which we'll get into in a little bit. So that's enough about my company. So Backbone. Good number of hands went up when asked if anybody here is using Backbone. So what I want to do tonight is not give you the marketing sales pitch about Backbone and all the wonders that it does, because you can find that in 1,000 different places online, and chances are you've at least read a little bit of that before. And I'm not going to bore you guys with slides either. I'm going to bore you with code instead. But hopefully it's going to be a little more entertaining than just sitting back and watching me code. I really want this to be a question and answer session for anybody that wants to know what I'm doing and why. And what I have set up is a very simple application. It's a nice little image gallery full of placekitten.com to give us some beautiful little kitties. And it's a jQuery application right now. It's just jQuery. It's fairly well structured, but it's just jQuery. And I'm going to walk through the process of converting this jQuery application into a Backbone application. And I want to do this for two reasons. One, to show you how you can start with whatever you have right now. It doesn't matter what you're starting with. And you can begin introducing Backbone into your application where it makes sense. And then two, because walking through an actual application conversion is going to run into a lot of problems. Every time you're switching from one framework to another, introducing something new, you're going to run into problems. Things are going to break. There's just no question about that. And that's one of the biggest pain points that people have when they get into Backbone is, what's this error? Why am I getting that error? All those kinds of things. So the walkthrough I'm doing is designed to break while I'm walking through the code. And I'm doing that very purposely because I don't want to candy coat and sugar coat anything that you guys are going to run into if you start using Backbone. I want to show you what you're actually going to run into and how to solve some of the problems that you're going to run into and what some of the issues are and how all of this stuff really works and fits together. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a good idea of what Backbone really does for you, as well as where you can go beyond Backbone to get more capability in your JavaScript applications. So if anybody has any questions, if you see something that you don't understand, please yell at me, because I'm probably going to be staring at my screen most of the time, and I might not see hands being raised. So please, just speak up and ask what's going on, and tell me when you don't know what I'm doing or why. And I'll answer your questions here. So with that, though, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, I've got this little image application. It doesn't save images directly to a database. All I'm doing is specifying a URL, in this case, placekitten.com. And when I enter in a URL into that little box, I get the nice little image preview here. And I can enter a name for the image, and I can enter a description in the box. And when I click Save, it adds it to the list, and it shows that image on the screen. I can click on any of these images. It's a pretty typical image gallery type functionality, right? Excuse me. So like I said, this is all written in jQuery right now. And it's a pretty simple little setup. I've got 4 different JavaScript files here. And the application starts in this imagegallery.js file, which is really just this one object literal with an init function. And that calls out to these other objects to get the list of images rendered across the top, to get the add edit image on the screen so that whenever you load the app fresh, it goes to the add image. And then to initialize this image viewer, which is what handles displaying of the images whenever we click on one. So the easiest place to start here, in 1 second, let me pull up my notes. The easiest place to start is in the show image file here. It's the smallest of the files other than the imagegallery.js. Pretty simple stuff. I've got a jQuery selector selecting the main element, which is the main display area. I've got an _JS template being loaded up. And if you're not familiar with _JS, it's basically Batman's utility belt for JavaScript. It's got everything that JavaScript is missing and all of the features and capabilities that you wish you had for Ruby and Python and functional languages built into it so that you can do really awesome things. And it includes a micro templating framework, which is accessed through _.template. Backbone itself relies on underscore. So if you're going to do Backbone applications, you're going to get an underscore anyways. So I recommend learning underscore even if you're not going to use Backbone, because underscore is awesome and it's used everywhere these days. So beyond the templates that I have there, I've got this show function, which does exactly what you would expect it to do. It shows an image on the screen. I pass an image object, which is nothing more than the name, the description, and the URL. And then I render the template that I had set up here using by calling that template function and passing the data into it. And then once that template has been rendered, I populate the DOM itself with the HTML output. And that's what creates our beautiful little image gallery to display the actual images. So this is really simple functionality. We're going to mess with it now. What I'm going to do to start with is introduce the idea of a Backbone view. Now there are a handful of primary components in Backbone. There's views, models, collections, routers, and then wrapping it all together is the event system. And then there's a few other additional things behind the scenes that help tie it all together and synchronize data with the server and all that good stuff. But I'm going to start with a view because the view is the easiest place to begin structuring your JavaScript code. The view in Backbone is what manages the DOM itself and also allows the interaction with the user to take place. For you to write code to handle user interaction events, click events and select events and text box changes and everything else. It provides the function, the encapsulation of a given area on the screen in terms of the DOM and coordinates the user interaction with that. So what I'm going to do is convert this display area here into a Backbone view, which is essentially this code. I'm going to start by wrapping this up in an immediately invoking function expression. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm doing here, the reason I've wrapped this in a function is to provide encapsulation, to provide scope for my variables. This is basically creating a function and then immediately invoking it, which allows me to define all of this stuff within there and use local variables so that my variables don't leak out into the global namespace. But that's kind of a detail at this point. I'm going to define a Backbone view here, and the way that we do this with Backbone, pretty much any object that we have in Backbone is going to use this extend keyword. So Backbone.view, that's obviously my view. There's going to be Backbone.model, Backbone.collection, and all of these have this extend keyword. If you're from Java, you probably recognize the keyword extend as the way you do inheritance. And it's the same basic idea in Backbone. It's inheritance in Ruby or in C# or Python or whatever. But in Backbone, it sets up the prototype chain of inheritance instead of your typical class-based inheritance. So once I have the extend keyword called, I'm opening and closing curly braces here, which if you're not familiar with JavaScript, this might look like it's typical class definition from C# or Java, but it's actually not. This is actually just an object literal in JavaScript. And this is a really important thing to understand when doing Backbone. So if I did something like this var config is not a class definition at this point. It is an object literal. It is a definition of an object, and it is the object instance at the same time. So instead of passing these curly braces in here, I could pass my variable config into there, and it's essentially the same thing. I'm passing an object literal into the Backbone view in order to define a new Backbone view. And within an object literal, we have key value pairs. The key value pairs can be pretty much anything that we want, including other objects or functions or strings or whatever. Within a Backbone view, though, there are a few key things that we want to provide. One of those things is a render function. Now, the Backbone view itself has a render function built into it, but it is literally no operation. It does absolutely nothing other than return this, which allows you to chain method calls onto the end of the render call. But I'm going to start by defining my render method. And my render method is going to be responsible for rendering my template into some HTML and then populating this Backbone view with that rendered HTML. So right now, I have the template definition happening here, and I have the template rendering happening here. And I'm going to move these. I'm going to take this template definition, and I'm going to pass it, and I'm going to move that into an initialize function, which is essentially the constructor inside of Backbone. And I'm going to say this.showImageTemplate equals the template definition right there. In my render function then, I'm going to move this HTML line down here, and this is going to call the showImageTemplate function, pass in my image data, and get the resulting HTML. There's one more thing I need to change though. In this ImageViewer.show function, I was passing in my image object, and I was using that image object in this function here. I need to change this from the image parameter, which is no longer available inside my Backbone view. I'm going to change that to this.model. A Backbone view recognizes a certain number of keywords that you can pass into it, model being one of them, collection being another, and a handful of other keywords that you pass into its constructor. So I'm going to use this.model, which the Backbone view recognizes, and I'm going to create an instance of my image view where I was previously rendering this template. So I'm going to say var image view equals new image view. And again, I'm creating an object literal by passing the open and close parentheses here. And this is where I'm going to use the model keyword. So I'm telling my image view, for the model, I want you to use this image parameter. And that way I have immediate access, I have instant access to that model down here, this.model. When I save this, and when it runs again, I can click on, HTML is not defined, sorry. A couple more things I need to do. Right, like I said, so the pain of converting things, right? So after I render this template down here, I have the HTML. I need to populate the view itself with the HTML. You guys are all familiar with jQuery, right? So jQuery allows you to create a jQuery selector object that represents a DOM element. Every Backbone view has a DOM element that it represents. And that DOM element is accessible through this $EL within the Backbone view. Every time you see this, know that this $EL is the Backbone view's element. It is what the Backbone view controls. It manages that DOM element for you. And it should be the only thing that touches that specific DOM element.
Why is it $EL?
The convention there is anytime you have a element wrapper, a jQuery selector around an object, the way you define that is typically by saying something like this, where you have $parentheses quote pound main to find the main element on the screen. Well, that returns the jQuery object, and the typical convention is to assign that to an element that has a variable that has a $in front of it to say this is a jQuery selected object. It's kind of become the norm and standard across all of the different DOM manipulation libraries out there. Zepto and MooTools and everything else that does DOM selection will give you, well, you'll typically see people creating variable names with the $sign in front of it. So that's why the $EL instead of just EL.
Do we know what that DOM element is yet?
The DOM, sort of. Do we know what the DOM element is? There's two different ways that a Backbone view will get its DOM element. Either generating it for you or having it assigned to the view instance. Now, I have not assigned an element to my view instance. I could come up here and say EL:main as part of the constructor parameters, and that would assign the element to the ID of main element in my DOM. But if I don't assign the element, then the view will generate an element for me. And by default, it generates a div. And it does this in memory, behind the scenes, not in the live DOM, so that you can manipulate it and work with it without the performance hit of doing stuff in the real view when you first stand it up. So we do know what it is. We know it's a div, and we can change that, which I'll show you guys a little bit later. And right now, this $EL is a div, and I'm going to populate that div with the results of my rendered template. Having done that, and having instantiated my view up here, I'm going to take the results of my image view.render method, and I'm going to grab the EL, the $EL out of that, and stuff that into the main element on my page. So now when I save this and re-render it, console, when I click on the little kitty images again, we see everything on the screen the same way we did before. So nothing changed in terms of the feature set of the application. I just replaced the pure jQuery approach with a Backbone view. And I know you're probably wondering, what's the advantage here? What did we really buy? And at this point, you haven't bought much other than putting a view in place. Quite honestly, if your code was just those 5 lines of jQuery to begin with, I don't know that I would change it. You might not need to. There's no reason that you have to change every last line of jQuery to a Backbone construct. Use what makes sense. But it makes for a pretty simple demo. The one advantage that we do get out of changing it to a Backbone view is I've now separated the concerns of this API, the image viewer object API, from the implementation. I've separated that from the implementation of rendering and managing this DOM element. And if I had any interaction, like the ability to click on the image and see a full-size version of it or anything else, then I could manage that interaction within this view and not have to worry about changing the API object. Keep everything nice and clean and separated. But otherwise, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward intro to a Backbone view. So we're going to take a look at something a little more complex than this now and show some actual interaction. Anybody else have any other questions first, though? So I'm going to open up this, my add edit form, which is significantly more complex. So my add edit form does a couple of different things. When I enter a URL and I tab away from it, it shows me the image that I had entered. It allows me to enter a name and a description, and clicking save, it adds it to the list of images. There's quite a bit going on here, and quite a bit more code. There's 50 lines of code instead of 10. So I'm going to take this code and convert it to a Backbone view as well, and show how to manage some of the events that we need in order to get the image preview and the save button working properly. Now again, I have a template, I have a jQuery object selecting the main display area, and in this case I have a click event and a change event that make calls back to these functions which do things like grab the current URL from the text box and update the preview in order to show the image. So I'm going to start again by wrapping this in a function. And I'm going to create another Backbone view down here at the bottom. I'm going to call this one add image view. Extend. And I'm going to add my render method again. Function. HTML equals this dot. Let me just go grab my template function call. This dot $el.html. Return this. So largely the same things that I was doing in the previous view so far. Add my initialize function. Add image template. So here's my add image form, converted to a view. I need to change my add new image function to create a new instance for add form equals new add image view. In this case, I don't have a model instance to work with, so I'm not going to pass in any constructor options. I am going to call my add form.render.el right here to populate the DOM. And so we still have the view working. I can still select this. I can still see my preview. But I haven't really taken full advantage of the Backbone view yet. My events are still happening in this old object. So these events can be configured inside of the Backbone view. Now I could go ahead and just paste these two jQuery event handlers down into the code right here. So you have this $main.onChange, call this callback, and the click event, call that other callback, which means I need to move both of those functions down into this view so that they are available. I could make this work, but instead of calling this $main right here, I'm going to need to call this $el, because again, we have the views element, and we're manipulating and managing the view element. So this should basically work. That's another little thing up here, because I moved those functions. So this, sorry, another call to main here. Call find. The joy of moving to Backbone. So I'm going to do _bind this, show image preview. Alright. I'll talk about that in a second here. Screw it. Alright, so while I'm trying to get this to work, What I'm trying to do is show you how we can migrate from the standard jQuery events to the Backbone events. So we can take the time to get this set up and working, or we can take advantage of Backbone's built-in event system. So Backbone views allow us to declare an event configuration inside of them. And there's two parts to the event declaration. On the left side, over here for you guys, there is the jQuery selector and event name. So I'm going to say click save. And that's going to be the equivalent of this line of code down here, click save. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to pass in my function name, save new image. And this function call, instead of saying this.save new image, I'm passing in the string name of the function, and Backbone is going to find that function within this view instance for me. I'm going to do the same thing with change URL, show image preview. And that means essentially I can get rid of those two jQuery event declarations. Behind the scenes, this is doing almost exactly the same thing. It's using jQuery to set up these events. Backbone is just giving us a little bit more convenience to set those up within the context of this view. So what it does behind the scenes is it parses out this string, and it looks at first the event name, click, and then it finds the element that we specified, the save element, which comes from the view's $EL. That's one of the real advantages that we get with the Backbone view is anytime we declare an event like this, we are limiting the scope of the event selector to the view itself. So any DOM element that exists inside of this view's element can be found inside of the event declaration. Any DOM element that exists outside of this view's element, so the image list, for example, up here at the top, or the add button up here, those elements exist outside of the view, so the event configuration will not find it. This helps us provide encapsulation and real control over the individual DOM elements and everything inside of the DOM within our views. Having set that up, my show image preview is going to call this.$EL.find. It's going to find my preview image element here, and it's going to adjust the source attribute of that. Hopefully it works this time, and there we go. So I've essentially moved a lot of code out of this add image object into my Backbone view. I've provided encapsulation of the interaction with that view's, with the DOM element that this view manages. And I was able to get a reduced amount of code inside of this object, which provides the core API that my application calls, and then encapsulate the real interaction inside of this Backbone view, setting up the events to handle both the input right here, and then a few other changes that I need to make in order to make this save button work. I've got a few more calls to this.$main right here. I'm going to change these to this.$EL once again. Save that. And I'll change the image slightly so we see something different. Click save, we see the image, and we can scroll and see the image in our list still.
Did you create a DOM element for this when you created the view?
Ask that again?
When you created the view object, did you pass in that element?
I did not. So when I created the view object that I passed in the element, I did not assign an element to this view instance. So I'm creating the view instance here, and since I have not assigned an element to the instance, it creates its own element, which is by default, again, a div. So the this.el is our div. And
how did it create the save and the URL elements inside of it?
that came from the template. The save the save button, oops. How did it create the save button and the image text box and all that, everything in there? That came from the template, which I declared in my initialize function here. So my initialize function reaches out to a DOM element, this dot add, or the add image template element in my DOM, which exists inside of my Jade template here, which is a server-side render template. So if you're not familiar with Jade or Haml, this renders into valid HTML. I swear, I promise it does. But it uses significant white space, much like Python, in order to reduce the amount of code, no curly braces or closing brackets. So I have this add image template. This is an HTML script tag with its type set to text/HTML. Setting that type on a script tag makes the browser ignore it when it comes to rendering it. It's not going to try and treat that script element as JavaScript because you've told it it's something other than JavaScript, and the browser's going, I don't know what to do with this. So it doesn't render it on the screen. And what that allows us to do is use this script tag to encapsulate some HTML. And so this is Twitter Bootstrap, control groups and rows and everything else in order to get the layout. But this produces my form here when I call this template function on the back end. So I am converting all of that script into an underscore template function, and then later on in my render function, calling the template function that I now have in order to produce the final HTML, and then populating that HTML into the views EL. Yeah.
So you're mixing the Jade template, Jade stuff with the underscore templating?
Not quite. The Jade stuff happens on the server. So this is a Node.js application using Express.js, which runs Jade templates by default on the server.
Okay.
It's like JSP or PHP or ASP.NET MVC. You have your server-side template that the server knows how to deal with. That's my Jade template that you're seeing right here.
So in your source, you would see the HTML.
Right. If I view page source right here, it's minified and impossible to find. But you would actually see if I do a search for add image template, here it is in all its wonderful.
The underscore template.
This is the script tag that Jade rendered right here. So that turned into an actual script tag with all the contents basically right here. And I know that's impossible to read, but this is the HTML output that my browser got. And then my underscore call over here, this is just JavaScript. This is just a jQuery selector to find that content and then turn it into a pre-compiled JavaScript function. So whenever you call underscore.template, it takes the HTML content that you pass into it and produces a function that can be called in order to produce the final output. It's a two-step process to render a JavaScript template.
I guess I'm curious about what the image view template would look like, because that one has like underscore variables in there along with
Right.
That's what I'm
So that,
curious.
I'll show you the Jade. So for the image view template,
Okay.
in order to get data into the template, it uses the standard, everybody in the world, PHP, ASP.NET, Ruby's ERB syntax.
I was just wondering if there was any like view. So that's all like standard with the Jade
Yeah.
just by
Yeah, so this is a multi-step template. This is a Jade template that renders HTML. The HTML gets sent down to the browser. The browser reads the HTML as an underscore template, and then underscore recognizes this syntax here in order to populate data into that location. All right. So I've got the add image working at this point. So we've seen a basic view, a view that manages events, talked a little bit about rendering templates here. Backbone model is typically the next thing that people get into after they start organizing their jQuery code using views. A backbone model is very much like a Rails model or a Django model or any other back-end model that you deal with. It stores data, and it knows how to work with data, and it knows how to persist data, in this case, making AJAX calls back to the server and loading data from the server API. So a backbone model does all of those things. One of the reasons that we want a backbone model is so that we don't store data in the DOM. If you're using data-attributes to store your real model data in the DOM, you're getting all kinds of performance hits and having all kinds of nightmarish problems with your application, most likely. The DOM is not meant to represent the data. The DOM is meant to represent the visualization of that data. And we can do really simple things to keep our data in JavaScript and out of the DOM, and then just have the DOM rendering a visualization of that data, which is exactly what you see when I'm rendering these templates to the screen. So when I click on one of these images, I've taken data that was in JavaScript, and I've rendered that into a visualization. Now again, if I view page source on this, there are JavaScript object literals hard-coded into my page right here. I know, again, this is compact and fairly difficult to read, but each one of these is a JavaScript object literal that is being rendered onto the HTML from my server-side processing. I'm preloading my image data into the DOM as a JavaScript object, not as data attributes in my HTML. Preloading it so that I can read it into my actual JavaScript object here. I'm passing it into my imageGallery.init function. And my imageGallery.init function is taking the options.images and holding on to that inside of my image gallery object so that I have access to my data in JavaScript memory space, not just in the DOM. Once I have it in here inside of my JavaScript object, I never touch the DOM version of this data again, because I don't want to take the performance hit of constantly reading it out of the DOM. It ends up being really problematic for a lot of different reasons. But right now, this is literally JavaScript objects that I'm passing in. If I do a console.log on this .images, you'll see a slightly better representation of this data in my JavaScript console. So here are the actual JavaScript objects that are being passed into my application. And as you can see, it's the name, it's the description, and it's the URL. So this is JavaScript object literals that I'm working with. And Backbone provides us with a backbone.model. A backbone.model is a much more robust object than a JavaScript object literal is. It provides features like events to tell us when a property has been changed. It gives us the save method to persist changes back to a server. It gives us a fetch method to load data from the server. It gives us all kinds of nice functionality, and it can help reduce the amount of code that we have. So back in the add edit form, whenever you click the save button, I'm doing two things here. I'm grabbing data out of the form itself, and then I'm using jQuery to make an AJAX call back to the server in order to save this data. And when that save succeeds, I'm doing a few things, storing the image in my array of objects, and then showing that image on the screen. So we're going to convert this to a backbone model now. And I do that again by declaring a variable. In this case, I'm going to call it imageGallery.image. I'm namespacing this particular object, and I'm doing that for a good reason as well. If I said in my JavaScript console here, new image, that image object already exists because it's part of the DOM itself. There is a DOM object called image, and it's an image tag. So if you ever want to create your own JavaScript object called image, be very, very careful that you don't accidentally clogger the real DOM image. So in order to prevent me from doing that right now, I'm going to attach my image object to my image gallery namespace. So if you're used to Java or C# where you have namespace objects, you can do the same thing in JavaScript, only any object in the world in JavaScript can become a namespace object for you. It's kind of convenient, kind of terrifying at the same time. So I'm going to say backbone.model.extend, again using the extend keyword. And my AJAX call up here is making a call to this /images URL. I'm going to move that URL attribute down to my image object. This is one of the keywords that a Backbone model recognizes, and it uses this URL attribute to figure out how to persist data back to the server and also how to load data from the server, depending on what I'm doing. So having declared this image and having given it a URL to work with, I can reduce a little bit of this code here. I'm going to create a new image gallery.image right here. So there's an instance of my new object. Then I'm going to delete most of this AJAX call and say image.save, pass in my data, and provide the same success callback that I had previously used on my jQuery AJAX call. So if you're doing jQuery AJAX calls already, good news, all of the options that you like to pass in are still valid here inside of the Backbone model save method. You just don't have to provide most of them anymore. So I've reduced a few lines of code there and provided a lot more functionality in terms of events and encapsulation by using an image instead of a raw jQuery AJAX call. I'm still gathering the data from the form using jQuery right here. Also a very important thing to note, Backbone does not replace jQuery. Backbone uses jQuery to help you manage your views and your data within those views. So having done that, I can come back here. Let me change this again. Oh, one other thing I need to, this is going to break, and I'll show you why. So my form basically works still, but when I click the save button, it worked, it saved it back to the server, but it's not displaying the image correctly. And the reason it's not displaying the image correctly is because of this, a slight change in the success function. Previously, when I was making that raw AJAX call, the return data here was just the raw returned data that I had entered as a JavaScript object literal. Backbone is overriding the success function and returning a Backbone model instance right here. So I don't have the raw data anymore. I now have my Backbone model instance. So when I push my model into my images, it's kind of broken because it's not the raw data, it's a Backbone model, and it doesn't like to show that correctly. So in order to get this to display my image correctly, I'm going to say var image data equals image.toJSON. If you're not familiar with the toJSON function in JavaScript, toJSON is a function that's built into most JavaScript objects from frameworks. toJSON is a way to override the JSON serialization process for any JavaScript object. It's part of the JSON specification. If you're really interested in that, you can hit json.org, or you can hit a blog post that I wrote recently. Just Google, who is this JSON guy anyways, and you'll find an article that I wrote all about JSON. I'm going to skip past all of this right now. Just know that when you call the save function on your Backbone model, it returns a model in your success function. So if you need the raw data, you're going to call image.toJSON. And now when I save this and add a new image, it saves and it displays correctly. And we can see at the very end of the list the appropriate image. How long do I have until Michael? Michael!
Okay.
Like, when do I need to stop?
Got about like another hour.
Another hour? Wow, okay. It's a long time.
About 8:20.
I don't know if you guys want to sit with me talking that long. Woo!
If you're done early, everybody can just hang out and mingle.
No, I can literally talk all night about this stuff. I used to get paid to do this. So, yeah.
Can you scroll down to new image, to image gallery again? Okay.
To the model definition?
Yeah, I just.
All right. So alongside Backbone model, there's a Backbone collection. A collection, as you would expect, is a collection of models. It gives us things like iterators, collection.each, select method to filter things out, a filter method to filter things slightly differently than select does. It gives us a lot of the expected features and capabilities of a collection, as you would expect from the Ruby or Java or C# again, any kind of collection that you're typically used to dealing with. So I'm going to move my model here. I'm going to move it into my core image gallery application file. And I'm doing this simply for convenience so that I can keep my image and my collection in the same file. We say imageGallery.imageCollection equals backbone.collection.extend. Again, there's that extend keyword to create a new type, only it's a collection instead of a model. There's two things that I need inside of my collection definition to start with. First thing I need is the model that this collection holds. In this case, it's the imageGallery.image. The second thing that I need is my URL. So I am moving the URL out of the image model into the collection. Both model and collection recognize the URL property for the same reason, for persisting data to the server, for loading data from the server, except the collection uses it to load all of the data for that collection, not just one at a time. And with my model now being assigned to my collection, I don't need the image model to have the URL declaration itself, because the image model knows what collection it belongs to, and the image model will look at the collection's URL in order to figure out how to load and save data. So it's a little bit of a convenience. Instead of having to declare the URL in both the image and in both the model and the collection, you can declare it once in the collection, and the model that the collection uses will automatically have access to it. This is going to break my code, and I'll show you that here in a second. First thing I'm going to do with my collection is replace this line of code here. Instead of just assigning it to the raw array of object literals, I'm going to pass that array of object literals into a new imageGallery.imageCollection. Expand that all the way here. So the image collection will take an array of objects and turn that into the image collection itself. So that means when I console.log this.images, I no longer have a raw array of images. I now have a backbone collection. I'm also going to change this use of the images so that it is now the image collection in my image list. And this has broken several things for several reasons. First thing is, you can see that in my console.log that I'm no longer logging an array of objects. I'm now logging a child, a backbone collection that has an array of objects in it inside of this models attribute. And since my this.images is no longer a raw array of of models, of model data, I'm getting an error because my image list that's trying to render at the top here is expecting all of the data to be right there on this .images. And it's not anymore. It's now inside of the collection. So I need to change the way my image list is working. And in my show function, what I was previously doing is passing in the array of images as a parameter to this show function, dealing with resizing for CSS reasons, but mostly iterating over this collection of images, the array of images. This is one of the places where underscore shows its awesomeness. You get this underscore.each function, which has been added to raw JavaScript arrays recently, but a lot of old browsers don't have the array.each function yet. So underscore gives us the ability to iterate over a collection of things, an array of things, and run a function for every item in that array. The good news is, since Backbone relies on underscore, this is really easy to change. Backbone collections integrate like 30 different methods from underscore very directly. So instead of saying underscore.each images, I can just say images.each and pass my callback function in right there. So that's iterating a Backbone collection versus iterating a JavaScript array. Really simple change to make. The image preview template, though, is still going to be broken. If I save this and run it, it's still broken.
It's images.
Oh, you're right. Images. Thank you. This is still broken. It's still giving me an error. Description is not defined. Because within this is a raw underscore template still, and it's expecting raw JavaScript objects or JSON data to be passed in. But again, this is now a Backbone model. So what I'm going to do here, and make sure I do the right version of this. What I'm going to do here is pass the to.json version of my image. So call my underscore template. Since the image is a Backbone model, I have a to.json function which gives me the raw data, and that will allow the function to render the individual elements correctly. So again, I have this working as expected, but a few other things are broken still. Since this.images is now a collection, and since my model no longer has this URL, when I go back and try to add an image, the form looks like it's going to work, but clicking that Save button gives me an error. A URL property or function must be specified. This error comes directly from the Backbone model. My image no longer has a URL attribute on it. So in my add form, where I was calling image.save, I don't want to use image.save directly because my image instance isn't part of my collection yet. I've created the image instance on its own, not as part of a collection. So instead of trying to do that and having to put the URL in both places, I'm going to change this image.save to this.collection.create. So this.collection is another thing that the Backbone view recognizes from constructor parameters. I can pass any Backbone collection I want as the collection for this view to use. And that gets assigned to this.collection. In this case, I want to pass in my images collection. So the image gallery.images right here, which is the collection I want to get that into my view so that I can call this.collection.create right here. To do that, I'm going to go up to where I'm instantiating my add image view, and I'm going to add a parameter to pass in my collection of image gallery.images. That's going to assign a collection to my add image view. My add image view now has access to this .collection, and the Backbone collection gives me this create function. Now the create function does two things. It takes in the data that I have and it creates a model based on the model configuration for that collection. In this case, it creates an image gallery.image because that's what I've configured here. And then the create function also persists it back to the server automatically. So instead of having to call this .collection.add and then immediately call this .collection.save, I can do all of that all at once using this .collection.create. Still passing the data, still passing the success function. It still gives me this image back as a result. And now my add form should be working again. I'll get a kitty, I'll hit save, and there's the display, and there's the image in the list. So even though it displayed the image in the list right here after I clicked save, clicking on any other image is now broken. You see at the bottom of the screen, uncaught type, error cannot read property ID of undefined. So this is a slightly different problem, but still related to the collections. So in my image list, I have another use of underscore. Whenever I click an image in the image list, the click event is handled right here, and it calls this.imageClicked, which is this function here. This image_clicked function is using underscore.select, and it's looking at what used to be a raw array of images in order to find the image with the ID that I had selected. But now, imageGallery.images is a Backbone collection, and the underscore select method doesn't really know what to do with the object literal. It works in a certain sense, but it doesn't give us the results that we want. It breaks things. So once again, I can change this to imageGallery.images, and instead of having to pass that in as a parameter here, just provide the callback function directly. And it's still slightly broken, although I am clicking on this. It's giving me this weird error of this localhost with this funny URL. The description is not defined still. So previously, the select function was returning the JavaScript object directly with all of the data. Now, since I'm calling select off of my collection, it's returning a Backbone model again. So, as you might be able to predict at this point, we fixed that by calling to JSON. So I'm getting my Backbone model, passing the raw data into my ImageViewer.show because that's what my image viewer expects. And there we go. Now my image viewing works as expected.
On the collection, you can call, you could just use get, then pass it the ID.
Good call. So on the collection, another one of the features that Backbone Collections has is instead of having to do all of the junk right here for select, there's a simple get method that I can use instead. Totally forgot about that when writing this. So the get method does exactly what I just showed, only in 3 characters instead of the 50 that I had. So it still returns that. Still returns the model and allows me to click on the image and get the results. Thank you, go ahead. All right. So one of the things you might have noticed in all of this is in my show image and in my add edit form, I have a lot of duplicated code inside of my views. Specifically, this initialize function is grabbing a template out of the DOM, and this render function basically has the same 3 lines of code. Render the template, populate the element, return this. If I look at the add edit form, you can see the same thing. Get the template out of the DOM, have a render function that renders the template, populates the element, and returns this. You're going to see this kind of boilerplate code over and over and over and over. And it's going to start to drive you mad after a while because you're going to literally copy and paste the same 3 lines of code into every single view that you create. So this is where abstraction and reuse comes into play. And one of the very first things that I did when I started writing larger applications in Backbone was start extracting all of this boilerplate code into something that's reusable. And over the last year and a half, that has turned into my Marionette JS framework. So the easiest way to get started with Marionette and all of the things that it does for us is to replace a lot of the redundant code inside of our views. Marionette provides a handful of different types of specialized views, not just Backbone view, but an item view, a collection view for rendering a list of items, a composite view, which renders a template with a collection inside of it, and a layout, which is a view that contains other views, so that you can do nesting and composition of views, and all this really cool stuff to create very large-scale applications. But the easiest way to get started with Marionette is to recognize the repetition inside of the views that we have and get rid of that repetition. So I'm going to take this Backbone view definition inside of my image view, the show image, which displays this, and I'm going to convert this from Backbone view to Marionette.item view. And to show you very briefly before I do that, I have all of my JavaScript references already set up here, including Marionette. So that's already in there. It's a separate download that you can grab off of MarionetteJS.com. I'm going to change this from a Backbone view to a Marionette item view. And the Marionette item view gives us a lot of the default functionality that we want, including a declaration of a template. Image, view, template. That's right. Yeah, image, view, template. So I can get rid of my initialize function and simply declare a template attribute on my view definition. The item view also gives us a render function. I don't need any of that. So there's my view definition now. And here's my views. Not quite working. So again, coming down to errors. What's happening now is my Marionette item view expects to work with a Backbone model. It expects there to be a toJSON method on that model. And at this point in time, the image that I'm passing into my image view instance is not a Backbone model. It's a raw JavaScript object, because if we look at the changes that we just made in our image list, cursor funky. Sorry, I need to restart Vim. Change my color scheme back. Alright, so when we click on one of these images, we are getting a Backbone model, but then I'm immediately taking that model and calling toJSON on it. And that's actually the cause of the problem now. So what we used as a fix a minute ago in order to get the raw JavaScript data into the view is now the cause of the current problem of this not working properly. So since my Marionette item view expects to work with a Backbone model directly, I'm just going to pass the Backbone model into this show method now. And my show image, receiving that Backbone model, will pass the model into my image view. Since the image view is a Marionette item view, I don't need to provide any render function. All I needed was a simple template, and clicking on this now works. Significant reduction in the amount of code that I had to write. So let's go in and replace this in one more place real quick. So my image list up here at the top. Right now this image list is being created by looping over all of the images and just rendering a raw underscore template and populating that into the DOM element, or into an array, and then pushing that into the DOM after all of that's done. I'm going to wrap all of this in a function real quick. I'm going to create an image preview, which is going to extend from marionette.itemView. And one thing you'll notice about Marionette's views, all valid Backbone options, Backbone view options, are still valid Marionette view options. Marionette's views directly extend from Backbone.view. So anything in the Backbone documentation that you want to do with a view, you can still do in Marionette. You don't have to do all of it though, because Marionette provides a lot of it for you. Marionette also provides a lot of additional extensions, including the template that we just showed. So I'm going to convert this into a Marionette item view real quick. Image preview, template, if that's right. Yeah. All right, and instead of looping through this and rendering the raw template, I'm now going to create an instance of my image preview equals new image preview. I'm going to pass the image in as the model. Again, Marionette's item view expects this to be a Backbone model. And since I'm using the collections.each, I am getting a Backbone model. I no longer need that. I'm going to change this to image preview.render.el, and this should basically work still, except it gives us a nice horrible vertical list instead of that nice horizontal list that we want. So here we're going to see another one of Backbone's options. By default, Backbone renders all views with a div tag, which of course uses a block display style in CSS. That's why my list is now vertical instead of horizontal. Backbone.view allows us to change the tag that is used for the wrapper element simply by providing a tag name. So I'm going to provide a tag name of span, which is going to change this from a block style to an inline style. And when I save this, it gives me my nice horizontal list again. So there's a place where a Marionette view is directly extending from a Backbone view, and we can use Backbone's options inside of our Marionette stuff.
Why didn't you have to do that before?
I didn't have to do it before because the Backbone view added a wrapper div around this. Previously, when I was iterating through all of this and rendering the image preview template with my image.toJSON right here, this was rendering the raw template, and my raw template does not have a wrapper div around it. The Backbone view is creating an additional wrapper element as this.el. Now, this is one of the things that frustrates a lot of people because a lot of people don't want this wrapper div around their templates. I generally don't have problems with it. Every now and then it does get in the way a little bit because of CSS, but there's almost always a way to make my CSS ignore that extra div. Either, in this case, by turning it into a span so that it gives me the horizontal list that I want, or in other cases, by using additional Backbone view options such as the class name, which allows me to set any CSS class that I want. So I can set, however many CSS classes I want right here, and those classes will get applied to the tag that the Backbone view generates for me, so I can set my styling for them.
So you can leave the tag name string empty and it won't use any tags?
That used to work. I think that broke in Backbone version 1. They either took it out or something changed slightly. So the question was, can you leave the tag name empty and have it not render a wrapper div? And that used to work. A lot of people used to do this. And I've been seeing a few reports recently that say that this no longer works in Backbone 1.0. So apparently it still provides a div. It checks for an empty string and creates a div anyways. I haven't actually verified that for sure. I've only seen a few people talking about that. But for my purposes, I want to span right now.
Didn't you say earlier you can also specify the element to use as opposed to having a wrapper?
Yes, I generally say don't specify an element for your view to use unless you have a really good reason to, like you're attaching to an already existing DOM element, which is not something I'm going to show tonight. That's a more advanced scenario. My personal preference and what I tell people to do is always allow Backbone to render the element for you and manage that element for you. So I now have my horizontal list. Hey Michael, can you get me another drink? Something without sugar, whether it's water or whatever.
Get water over there. Gotcha.
Thank you. Thank you. Cold.
It looks like the source code in Backbone does a result on the tag name and wraps it inside alligator braces, so it's going to fail. So
Okay.
yeah, you can't just leave it empty.
You can't leave it empty anymore. Okay.
Not anymore.
Used to work, doesn't anymore. All right, so we now have another item view in here. There's still a lot of code inside of this shell function. Thank you. There's still a lot of code inside of this shell function, and we can reduce a lot of this code, again, with Marionette. Another one of the view types that Marionette provides is a collection view, which does pretty much what you would expect by the name. It takes a collection of Backbone models, and it renders all of them in a nice list. Also pretty easy to set up. We say var image list equals marionette.collectionView.extend. Again, this extends directly from Backbone.view, so all of the Backbone view options are available. A few things that I need, well, one thing that I need for a Marionette collection view is I need to specify an item view type. In this case, image preview. And what this does is it says, when my collection view is iterating over the collection that I passed into it, for every item that it finds, use the image preview view to render that individual item. So having done this, having declared my collection view and told it which item view type to use, I can kill all of that. I can say instead image list equals image list. I can pass my collection of images into that, and I can call image list.render.pl right here, render my image list, and populate the HTML, and my image list still renders correctly. So I've significantly reduced the amount of code inside of this file. I'm no longer iterating over everything. I'm now just declaring the configuration of my image preview, declaring the configuration of my collection view, and then telling my collection view to render it and then populate it into the DOM right here. Once again, I'm a big fan of my view being the one and only thing that manages and manipulates the DOM element that it represents. And I still have some DOM manipulation code inside of my show function. Specifically this right here. This code right here is what allows me to scroll left and right in my image list. So if I take this out, refresh the page, it's no longer a horizontal scrolling area like it was. I still want it to be though, but I don't want that code inside of my show function because the show function is no longer responsible for that area of the screen. The image list is. So what I'm going to do is create a resize function inside of my image list, and have that resize function change the CSS on my element and adjust accordingly. Now I need to actually call this, which I'm going to start by doing that in my initialize function, which again is like the constructor for the view. I'm going to call this.resize. Oh,
Line 46.
yeah, right here, images. I no longer have access to the images collection. So this again is this.collection for my collection of images. And so now I get my appropriate scrolling, except if I try to add another image, that's another problem here. Get to that in a second. If I try to add another image, it's not going to add it to the end of my list. I'll have to refresh the screen in order to see it at the end of my list. So what I can do is inside of my initialize function, I can set up an event listener. I can set up this.listen_to collection, add, call this.resize. And I'm going to do this on both the add and remove function in case we get around to actually being able to remove images from our collection. So the Marionette CollectionView does a lot of things for us. It pays attention to the collection that's passed into it. And anytime the collection has a new model added to it, the collection view says, oh hey, a new model was added, let's go render it. And that's happening through Backbone's events, which is something that I haven't really talked about yet. Backbone provides a lot of events from all of its different objects. Whenever we add a model to a collection, whenever we remove a model from a collection, whenever we change an attribute on a model, whenever we do a lot of a number of different things, the Backbone objects are triggering all of these events. And so there are two very specific events that we want to pay attention to in our collection, the add and remove events. And so I'm setting up a listener, an event binder, that says, hey view, pay attention to the collection and wait for the add event and the remove event. And when either of those fire, call this resize function so that we can resize the screen appropriately and display things and get that nice horizontal scrolling bar the way we expect it to work. Of course, there's another problem in my add form that we saw a moment ago. Reference error ID is not defined. This is coming from my add edit form. What's going on here is a similar problem that we had earlier with changing this over to a collection view. Since I have a collection, this is caused by the changes that we made to our image viewer.show method. So again, earlier we changed this success function in the add process to use the image data, the raw JavaScript data, in order to show the image. But then I changed the image viewer.show so that it expects a Backbone model instead of the raw data. So here, instead of passing in the image data, we're going to pass in the raw image. But also, since I've changed this image list to use a Marionette CollectionView, I no longer have to do most of this code in here. I don't have to manually push the image into this collection, which I actually should have deleted a long time ago. I don't have to manually add that model to the collection because I'm adding it by calling create right here. And I don't have to tell it to show this image in the image list either. I don't have to re-show the entire list of images. I can get rid of that and reduce my success function down to this one call to show the individual image without having to tell it to update this big list. Again, since I've converted my image list to a Marionette CollectionView, as soon as this collection.create succeeds, the collection triggers that add event, and the add event is handled by the collection view in order to render the new item. So I should be able to come in here now, get an image, see if I can get a different one, there we go. Click save. Oh, come on, I used my thing. Well, that one is baffling me slightly. Let's see if I have that in my notes.
Did you delete get ID? Is that still there?
That was a different part of the application. That was the image click, not the image add.
Is that the right button at the end there?
No,
It
it's,
looks like it didn't even write to the, didn't even save to
yeah, it doesn't look like it worked.
It
Oh.
should tell you which line it fell on.
Well, here's one of the problems and one of the frustrations. It's not going to tell me which line it failed on. And I'll show you why. So, at this point, there's no line number for the failure because this failure did not happen inside of my JavaScript.
Right.
It happened- It happened inside of the rendering of the template. So the underscore template method is what failed. And since that happens in an anonymous function, it can't give us the callback line. But this ID is not defined. When you see an error like this in Backbone applications where you see some field name is undefined, that's typically going to be the underscore template failing because it's not getting the object that it expected and the data wasn't there and it's trying to find a value that just doesn't exist. So, tracing through this, it's in my collection view. Oh, I know what the problem is. And I do have this in my notes actually. Just forgot about it, even though it was in my notes. So the problem is actually inside of, it's caused inside of the add edit here, inside of this create process. If we look at my template, up here. If we look at my image preview template, when I first wrote this and I was working off of jQuery, I had a data ID attribute in order to store the model ID. So I just happened to know this is where it's failing. It's failing because of this data ID not being there. Now I could take this out and everything would work, but I don't want to do that in this case. I'm going to pretend that the data ID is needed for some other plugin, and I'm going to fix the cause of the problem, not the symptom of the problem. The cause of the problem in this case, the reason that it can't find that ID is because the ID is assigned by the server when this create function is called. Since I need the ID from the server inside of my template in the JavaScript, I have to wait for the server to respond saying, it was saved successfully, here's all of the new data that you need, including the ID. And Backbone by default is optimistic in server success, which makes me very pessimistic about Backbone and saving models. So I can add this wait true option to my create call. This wait true puts Backbone into pessimistic mode, basically saying, I don't trust that the server is going to succeed. I'm going to wait for the actual response from the server before moving on. So it puts things into true asynchronous mode instead of just assuming that everything worked. And by adding this wait true option to my collection create, the server will have a chance to respond with my image's ID. And then when I actually save the image and send that back to the browser, it works correctly and it adds it to the end. And you can see it did add it to the end. I can add another image here. Click Save. And it is adding it to the end, and it is resizing everything appropriately. So this comes back to what I was showing inside of my image list. How my collection view pays attention to the model being added to the collection, and then I'm also paying attention to the add in order to call the resize function to resize the area that's being displayed so that it continues to scroll left and right.
So why is it wait true the default?
It used to be, and a whole bunch of people said it shouldn't be, and I said no, it should be, and everybody else won. Democratic society, I guess. And I don't know, it drives me crazy. Honestly, I hate that it's defaulted to not wait.
Is that built into the backbone view, or is it?
That's built into the Backbone model.
So you could override that to Marionette.
Yes, I could, but Marionette doesn't actually provide any extensions for models or collections. Marionette's primary focus is two things: application structure, which we'll get to here in a second, and views, composability and reduction of boilerplate code in views. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there a way to kind of set a default, like as wait true for within?
There should be, and I'm pretty sure there is. Have you done that?
I mean, you can modify, you can extend Backbone to automatically do that.
Yeah.
But then you could be breaking someone else's plugin or something.
So I get worried about changing Backbone directly unless I know that I'm in complete control of everything. But you should be able to do it. I haven't typically done that. I just put the wait true in there whenever I need it. I don't always need it either. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Like if we didn't need this ID, let me just show you that. If I don't need the ID in this template, then I can remove, in my add edit, I can remove the wait true. Oops. And when I hit save, it does work because I no longer need that ID from the server.
Then will the click on the last image fail?
Yes. Right now the click on the last image will fail. But we can fix this as well.
And sometimes you can wait to assign the ID as a data attribute to maybe on render if it's there, and then as the view, as it gets updated, as the model comes back and that ID gets assigned to that model, it'll re-render and then it'll actually assign the ID.
Right. The model will trigger a sync event when it finishes coming back from the server, and you can use that to update the DOM with the ID if you do need it. But to fix the click, right now I'm trying to click on this very last image that I just added, and it's failing. I can fix that. That's happening inside of my image list. This is going to reduce code again, which is another good thing to show. So in my image list, I've got the image click handler, which calls the image clicked function. Right now, the whole reason I had the data ID in my DOM was so that when I click on the image, I get the current ID, and I can find that ID in the DOM for the image that was clicked, and then call the imageGallery.images.get to get the specific model that was clicked. But since I've converted all of this over to a Marionette item view and Marionette collection view, none of this is necessary anymore. I can actually take this click event and the image clicked function, and I can move this down into my image preview, configure my events to say click a.preview image clicked, which is the name of the function that I just cut. I can move all of this down here, but once again, I don't need to look for the image based on the ID and looking at the DOM and then getting the image out of the collection. Since this is a Marionette item view, I already have access to the image through this .model. So now, I have better encapsulation over this click event because it's happening inside of the individual element instead of at a higher level. And I have immediate access to the exact model that we are trying to interact with because it's encapsulated inside of this item view. So I can call imageGallery.imageViewer.show this .model. And when I click on one of these, it doesn't work. Yay! Oh, I know why. No, I am calling it by default. Oh, I probably have the event wrong. Yeah, image preview. My selector was wrong. Alright, so now when I click on this, it's using the exact image object that we have already rendered as this .model and telling the image viewer to show that. So this also fixed the add problem because I'm no longer going to look for an ID in the DOM when I click on this image. So when I add this to the very end, click Save, scroll over, I can click this one and show it, and I can now click the very last image in the list because it's not looking for that ID that that I didn't wait for from the server. I'm now using the raw model instead of looking up the model based on the ID. So one of the other things that you'll see a lot inside of this code, which I haven't talked about a ton, is populating the actual DOM with the contents of the views that I'm rendering. So every time I create a view instance, I render that view, and then I take the $EL out of the view and stuff it into the DOM right here. This gets really tedious really quickly. It's another thing that you're going to do 1,000 times over in your code, and you're going to end up having duplicate selectors all throughout your code. So this image list, for example, this one actually isn't duplicated. But if I look at the show image, you'll see I have a selector for the main element in the application's DOM. And if you look at the add edit, I have the exact same selector happening right here. That duplication is generally bad because now you have two different places that you have to go and manage that selector identifier, and it becomes a problem. It also gets to be a problem when you start swapping views in and out of the DOM because you can actually cause a lot of memory leaks by not properly closing down your backbone views. If you forget to unbind your events, if you forget to unwire things, you can cause memory leaks and cause zombie objects that raise up from the dead at a later point in time when you think the view is already gone and eat your brains. And bad things happen. So to reduce a lot of this boilerplate and also to solve the zombie problem, Marionette has the idea of a region. And a region manages one DOM element and the content of that element for you so that you don't have to worry about doing selectors like this inside of your code. So to start with, to make it easy to see, I'm going to replace this $main with a new Marionette.region. And I'm going to start just by moving this configuration out of a jQuery raw selector into a region. And where I'm calling this main HTML right here, which used to be my selector, well, now I have this region object, and instead of a HTML function, I have a show function. And my show function manages rendering the view for me. So my add edit view is now using this region to display in the screen instead of using the raw jQuery selector to populate it. Now this hasn't really solved the problem of duplication yet. I still have the main selector over here inside of this image viewer. So in order to reduce the duplication, I'm going to introduce another object real quick and then show you how to reduce this duplication. So back in my image gallery application, my image gallery file, this is the main application object, and it has this init function. And the init function is called from within my HTML right here. So I'm calling this imagegallery.init, passing my data into it. Marionette provides a marionette.application object that takes an object literal directly into it, and I can have this init function in there still. And everything still works, or should. Init, let me find. Oops. Let's say new. And everything still works exactly like it did. I still have this init function on my application object because I passed this init function into it. But the advantage now is I can say imagegallery.addRegions, and I can define as many regions as I want on the application object directly. So I'm going to take that main region, and I'm going to turn it into a selector right here. Now I can go back into my add edit. I no longer need the region definition inside of add edit directly. I can say imagegallery.main.show. And my image add edit functionality no longer knows anything about the DOM element that my view is being stuffed into. I've abstracted that knowledge away. I can go into my show image and do the exact same thing. Delete this .main, change this to imagegallery.main.show. Get rid of the render, the EL right there, because the region handles that for me. And clicking on one of these, I still get the display of the image correctly being displayed through the use of my region. There's another very big advantage that I have by doing this, not just reducing code duplication, but also eliminating the zombie view problem. So whenever I call show on this region, the region itself keeps track of the current view that's being displayed. And when I call show again, whether it's in the same file or a different file or wherever else, I'm calling the same show function on the same object, same region object. The region says, I've already got a view here, I better dispose of it properly. So the region calls all of the view's shutdown code for you. If you have a close method on your view, it'll call that close method for you. If you don't have a close method, Backbone.view has a remove method built into it, and it'll call the remove method for you. So it's pretty smart about working with raw Backbone views versus Marionette views, or any other Backbone view from any other Backbone framework. It will shut down your view properly and make sure that your view is completely disposed of so that you don't run into zombie objects later on.
Can I just ask, how big is Marionette?
It's around 15K. That's without gzipping it on the server, so if you gzip, it'd probably be around 12K. So it's slightly larger than Backbone itself. Backbone comes in at around 9K. If you look at jQuery, that's like 32K plus Backbone, 9K plus Marionette, 15K or so. You're looking at around 50 to 60K of total size. Yeah, underscore is like 4. The whole thing is pretty dang small. One thing you want to do in your production application is to reduce the overhead of downloads, is you never want to reference all your files individually like this. When you're in production mode, you always want to concatenate, minify, and render the one file down to the browser. But honestly, I'm not worried about 60, 80K worth of JavaScript in terms of download performance. I'm more concerned about the 5 gigs worth of images that I have displaying on my home page. You'll get a lot more performance improvement by optimizing those images on your home page than you will by optimizing the file size for your JavaScript. But you don't want to send your individual files down to the browser because that causes a massive delay having to download all of the individual files. Because every time your browser downloads a JavaScript file, it stops downloading any ads. It just waits for that JavaScript file to finish. So reducing everything down into a single JavaScript file, get all of the JavaScript down into your browser all at once, you'll get a much faster loading application because it will get to the rest of the stuff faster due to reduced latency of having to grab individual files, especially on mobile devices like an iPad or an iPhone. Let's see. We're pretty close to out of time. There's one last thing that I want to show you guys real quick. One of the other advantages that we get from the Marionette application object is instead of having to provide our own init function, there are initializers built into Marionette's application. So I'm going to take some of this code. I'm going to move this image collection creation to an event, first of all. So my image gallery will trigger various events. One of the events being initialize before, and I can add an event handler directly. This looks basically like any other jQuery event that you would bind to. This is a Marionette specific event coming from the Marionette application object. So in my initialize before, I'm going to take the options that were passed into the Marionette application and create my image collection. Over in my HTML, my layout.jade, I'm going to change this from imagegallery.init to imagegallery.start. The Marionette application object has a start method built into it. I don't need to provide this init function right here. I can move all of this code into the individual files where it really belongs. So I'm going to take these 2 lines for the image list. I'm going to come into the image list file, and I'm going to say imagegallery.add initializer. And these initializer functions will get run when I call the start function. So the start function gets called, and it looks for all of the initializers that I've added, and it runs those in whatever order they were added to the application object. So I'm going to take the add edit image and move that into the add edit file. Image gallery.add initializer. Paste that in there. And the image viewer.init, which is in the show image file. Image gallery.add initializer. And assuming I spelled everything correctly, I no longer need this init function. I no longer need to pass an object into here. I can just create that directly. Everything still works. All of my image list still stands up and displays. When I load the page immediately, I still have the collection of images. I still get the add image form. But I've moved all of the initialization of my application out to the individual files where it really belongs. And this again goes back to encapsulation and everything else. where you can come in here and you can add these initializers to as many files as you need, and you can have modularized application design. So I can actually come into my Jade application, for example. I can go up to the top here and say, you know what, I don't want my image list anymore. I can remove that, and my application still works. Previously, when I had the initialize function inside of my image gallery here, if I undo all of that, this breaks. If I change this back to init, this breaks because it expected that init function to exist on this image list, but I removed the image list file from the HTML reference. It's no longer there, so it breaks. That's a very bad thing. We don't want things to break. So I'm going to move back to my start method. I'm going to remove my init function again because I don't need it. And everything works. The advantage that we get here is twofold. All of our code is in the file that it belongs in. The image list file now contains the initializer for the image list part of the application. The add edit file now contains the initializer for the add edit part of the application. I no longer have to worry about having all of those files if I don't want all of those files. And that gives us the ability to send certain files down to the browser for certain users. If you have an administrative user, somebody that's already logged in and has administrative rights, you can send additional files down to the browser, and those files have their own initializer in order to set up all of the administrative functionality. So you can do some really cool things like that and get your code modularized so that you can compose the application. And there's a lot more features inside of Marionette, of course. There's modules and there's additional view types. I haven't even touched on Backbone's router, which we can use to manage the URL when we click on one of these images so that when we refresh it, we go straight back to that image. There's a lot more that we can do with Backbone and with Marionette, but we could literally be here for days talking about this stuff. And like I said, I used to get paid to talk for days about this. But I'm going to call it good right here. This has been a whirlwind introduction on migrating a jQuery application to Backbone and then reducing the boilerplate while also adding additional functionality and capabilities with Marionette. So again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to come talk to me afterwards. I do have some Kendo UI shirts, some stress balls and stickers. I also have some fancy little Marionette stickers here. Unfortunately, I grabbed the wrong pile of Marionette stickers, so there's only a few of them. So if you do want them, better hurry up and get out here. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Oh, I should also put this up here real quick. So if you guys want to contact me, all the information about me, my employer, and how you can get a hold of me.
And much thanks to Kendo UI. They paid for him to come down and paid for him to stay here so that I didn't have to. We have no sponsors, so things like that come out of my pocket, unfortunately, which makes things difficult sometimes. Thank you, Derek. It was great, awesome. I think everybody enjoyed it. One more round of applause. Coming down, I appreciate it. So next month, I always do this. I never actually know the date of the